Usually when we talk about plagiarism, we think of like a stolen melody in a pop song, or maybe a politician lifting a speech word for word.
Right.
It's a very clear-cut, legalistic thing. Somebody took something that didn't belong to them, scrubbed the serial numbers off, and, claimed it as their own.
Yeah, it's framed as a transaction, a
Yeah.
blatant theft of intellectual property.
Exactly. But today, we are looking at a completely different kind of plagiarism. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're basing this on a fascinating stack of sources you sent over.
Oh, yeah.
We've got research papers on ancient Mesopotamian mythology, histories of early theological development, and a really dense philosophical text. And they all converge on this deeply provocative premise.
Which is quite the hook.
It really is. The premise is, what if the concept of the Mother of God, this foundational idea in major world religions, what if that is actually a form of structural plagiarism?
Encountering that claim right out of the gate can feel incredibly jarring. If you're listening to this, you might immediately be thinking, okay, they're just bashing traditional views of religion. But looking at the historical data across these sources, we are not talking about plagiarism in a legal copyright infringement sense. I mean, you can't sue an ancient civilization.
Right. And we aren't talking about, like, a malicious conspiracy either. The mission of our deep dive today is to map out what we might call the Great Inversion.
The Great Inversion.
Yeah. We're going to trace how human civilizations went from worshiping a generative feminine source like the origin of all reality to a top-down masculine authority. And honestly, more importantly, we're going to explore how this ancient shift secretly dictates the way you view reality, authority, and even your own physical body today.
Because the historical architecture of these ancient ideas, it shapes the water we are all currently swimming in.
Totally.
We're talking about a profound transformation through reinterpretation. It's about how ancient symbolic structures of creation were inherited, flipped upside down, and reconfigured over centuries to serve completely new societal needs.
I really want to dig into how that mechanism actually works. So let's start at the beginning with the original blueprint. Looking at the mythological research in our stack, we are taken back to the early belief systems across Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and the Mediterranean.
Yes, very early agrarian societies.
Right. And back then, the generative principle of reality, the source code for existence, basically was almost entirely feminine.
We have to be very precise with our language here to understand how these ancient people viewed their world. We are talking about figures like Isis, Inanna, Shakti, and Gaia.
The heavy hitters.
The heavy hitters, exactly. In these early systems, these figures were not secondary characters. They weren't just the wives or consorts of some primary creator who did all the heavy lifting. They were ontologically prior.
Okay, ontologically prior. I want to make sure I'm grasping the actual weight of that phrase, meaning they were the very foundation of being itself.
Yes. Creation did not come from outside them. Some male deity didn't arrive from the void and use them as raw material to build the universe.
Right.
Creation unfolded through them. The philosophical papers we have refer to this primary feminine source as the originating field, the matrix, or the womb of existence.
So in these ancient systems, God and goddess aren't just giant humans in the sky with different biology.
No, not at all.
They aren't genders in the way we use the word on a census form. They are organizing principles for how reality works.
Precisely. If we break down those symbolic definitions, the feminine principle represents the field. It is generation, continuity, embodiment. It is the raw, unending capacity to produce reality.
Okay.
The masculine principle, on the other hand, represents form. It is direction, law, distinction, boundary, and structured identity.
Let me try an analogy here because I want to make sure this lands for you listening and isn't just abstract philosophy.
Go for it.
Think about a farm or a garden. The feminine principle, the field, is the soil itself.
Yeah.
It is the climate, the moisture, the inherent capacity for life to grow. It's the generative matrix. And the masculine principle, the form, would be the fences you put up. It's the blueprint of the garden beds, the specific identity of the crops you decide to plant, like the rows of corn versus the rows of wheat.
That is an excellent way to visualize the dynamic.
Because you can have a blueprint for a farm all day long. You can have a strict set of rules for where the fences go, but if you don't have the soil, if you don't have that prior generative capacity, nothing exists.
Nothing can exist.
You can't have the farm without the soil first. So in this ancient generative ontology, The field absolutely must precede the form. The feminine must precede the masculine.
Right. If something exists, it must emerge from a prior condition that allows existence to occur. That prior condition is what these early agrarian traditions encoded as the feminine source. For thousands of years, humans looked around and saw that life emerges from the dark, from the soil, from the womb.
Yeah, it's incredibly grounded in what they saw every day.
Exactly. The field generates the form. It was a worldview deeply tied to the cycles of the earth.
Okay, but logically, this creates a massive puzzle. If the field-first reality makes so much intuitive sense, if it aligns with how we naturally observe nature, why on earth did humanity abandon it?
That is the big question.
How did we end up with the systems we have today, where the form, a transcendent masculine god, is the primary creator, and the field, the feminine, is just a secondary vessel?
This brings us to the Great Inversion. And to understand how this happened, we have to look at the historical and political realities outlined in our sources. We see a massive structural pivot occurring during the formation of later theological systems.
Which one specifically?
Well, specifically taking shape around post-Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity. During this era, the concept of a singular transcendent God emerged, and this God was framed as entirely male-coded in language, authorship, and authority.
But wait, how do you convince an entire civilization that has worshipped the generative soil for millennia to suddenly look up at an abstract masculine architect? Did it just, happen overnight because some theologian wrote a new scroll?
Not at all. It happened because the needs of human civilization drastically changed. Think about the geopolitical landscape of that era. You had populations facing exile, like the Babylon captivity, or sprawling, multi-ethnic empires like Rome trying to govern really diverse groups.
Okay, so massive instability.
Constant instability. And if your god is tied to the soil, to a specific geographic field or a local river, what happens when your people are conquered and forced to move?
Oh, your god is defeated.
Your god is defeated. To survive as a cohesive people, you need a unifying principle that transcends geography. You need a portable god.
Wow, a portable god. I never thought about it like that. So a localized, soil-based religion becomes a massive vulnerability if you were displaced.
Exactly. You need abstract law, rules, and covenants that you can carry with you anywhere. So the emphasis naturally shifts from the localized generative field to the universal transcendent form. God becomes the ultimate top-down architect, completely separate from the messy, conquerable earth.
That makes perfect historical sense. But these new theology builders immediately run into a huge philosophical problem.
The biology problem.
Yes. If you have a transcendent, abstract God who exists outside of the physical universe, you still have to account for birth. You have to account for incarnation and biological life actually entering the physical world. If God is completely separate from the soil, how does the divine touch the material world without losing its transcendent status?
They needed the generative field, but their new theology dictated that the masculine form was already the ultimate original creator.
So what do?
They solved this by taking the ancient archetype of the feminine and completely reinterpreting it. She's no longer the originating source of reality. Instead, she becomes a vessel. She becomes the mother of God.
And this is where that structural plagiarism concept we started with comes back into play.
Yes.
It's like a culture taking an ancient architectural blueprint for a house, keeping all the exact same load-bearing walls, but totally reversing what belongs on the top floor and what belongs in the basement.
The structural continuity is preserved. You still have a divine masculine and a divine feminine. You still have the dynamic of creation. But the sequence and the hierarchy are entirely reversed. To quote one of the theological analyses we are looking at, the one who is born becomes the ultimate origin, and the one who births becomes secondary.
The one who is born becomes the origin. That is such a wild cognitive leap. It's like saying the fence builds the soil.
It is a profound inversion of logical sequence. In the earlier models, the goddess was the main character because the field must precede structure. In the later traditions, God is placed as the ultimate creator, and the feminine field is just a supportive, subordinate space where his creation is carried out.
This inversion doesn't erase the original structure. It just reframes it. And it reframes it in a way that fundamentally alters how human beings process reality.
Completely.
Which brings me to what I think is the most urgent part of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
I want to shift the focus directly to you, the listener, because it is very easy to listen to this and think, okay, fascinating ancient history, great trivia for a dinner party.
Right, keep it academic.
Exactly. But I'm trying to grasp how a centuries-old debate about God and goddesses changes the way I act at my desk job today.
It changes everything, because psychologically, this inversion has been the operating system of the modern world for thousands of years. Because of this hierarchical flip, humanity has been conditioned to associate authority, origin, and ultimate truth with abstraction and distance, the transcendent, masculine-coded God. We assume that the highest truth is something above us, abstract, and rule-based.
And as a result, we instinctively downgrade everything else.
We are conditioned to associate embodiment, matter, and biological life processes with something lesser, dependent, or even flawed. It is just the vessel.
I can see how incredibly visible this is everywhere. Like, think about the corporate world. It's like when corporate leadership sends down a new policy that looks absolutely perfect on a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is the form, abstract, top-down rules. But the actual human beings working on the warehouse floor, the field, they know it's going to be a total disaster in real life. Yet our society almost always values the abstract data over the messy, lived human experience.
The research highlights some very specific dichotomies that emerged from this inversion. Because the architectural blueprint was flipped, humanity started viewing the spiritual mind as inherently superior to the physical body.
Which explains so much of modern diet and hustle culture.
Oh, entirely.
We treat our bodies like machines that our minds need to hack or dominate. Rather than treating the body as a generative source that needs to be nurtured, we try to force the form onto the field.
We also see it in how we treat the environment. The earth became secondary to heaven. Relational intelligence became secondary to rule-based authority. The conflict between God versus goddess isn't really a petty debate about religious belief. It is an ongoing conflict over which layer of reality we actually consider primary. Is it structured identity or the generative source?
If you are listening to this and you are feeling a sense of friction, maybe realizing that this structural distortion is running in the background of your own mind, dictating what you value and what you dismiss, what are you supposed to do with that?
That's the hard part.
Because honestly, getting angry at a millennia-old paradigm shift doesn't really fix your worldview today. Are we all just supposed to be furious that the physical, relational world got downgraded?
This is where you have to separate your frustration from the architecture. If you just get angry at the system, you're still trapped reacting to it. You aren't fighting a malicious conspiracy. You are dealing with a structural adaptation that helped ancient societies survive, but has, long outlived its utility.
Right.
And metaphysically, the philosophical texts in our stack point out that there are ways to resolve this tension without just collapsing one side into the other.
Because we don't want to just flip the hierarchy back and say, only the feminine field matters, masculine form is useless.
No, that wouldn't work either.
Going back to our analogy, a farm with incredibly rich soil, but absolutely no fences, no blueprints, and no structure just gets eaten by deer or completely overgrown with weeds. You clearly need both. So how do we actually resolve this without just playing tug of war?
There are two distinct models proposed in the texts to resolve the tension. The first is called dual aspect monism.
Okay, dual aspect monism. That sounds incredibly dense.
It does sound like a mouthful, but we can bring it right back to the farm analogy you built earlier. Dual aspect monism posits that reality is ultimately one single unified thing.
Okay.
You don't argue about whether the soil or the fences are more farm. They are both equally the farm, expressing different properties of it. Reality expresses itself equally through both the generative field and the structuring intelligence. Neither is secondary in essence.
Oh, I see. They're two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. One might be prior in sequence. You absolutely need the field before you can build the form, but neither is lesser in value.
I really like that. It's like saying reality is a single breath, but it inherently has both an inhale and an exhale. You can't say the exhale is a secondary lesser vessel just because the inhale has to happen first. It's one continuous process.
That's a great way to put it.
So what is the second model?
The second model is emanation. This is the idea that an infinite, incomprehensible source simply differentiates itself into countless forms as it expands outward. In this model, gendered symbolism, calling something a transcendent god or a generative goddess, is just the clunky, imprecise language human beings use to describe the stages of that expansion.
Right, because we just don't have the vocabulary for it.
Exactly. The source emanates out, and we slap labels on the different stages because our brains need categories to make sense of the infinite.
So to be well-informed and grounded here, the listener just needs to figure out which operating system they are actually running and then consciously decide if they want to update it.
You have to decide your ontology. Do you believe reality is fundamentally generative field first? Is it fundamentally structural form first? Or is it unified, where both are inseparable and equally vital?
And I imagine once you clarify that for yourself, a lot of that friction we talked about starts to dissipate.
It really does, because you begin to recognize that religious and cultural language encodes layered meanings. It carries historical baggage, survival mechanisms of ancient empires, and symbolic shorthand. It is not just making literal truth claims about giant beings in the sky. Understanding the deep architecture of these ideas allows you to step back. You see the blueprint for what it is, and you stop being reactive to it.
This has been such a massive journey to trace out. We started with the ancient myths, looking at how early human civilizations, deeply tied to the rhythms of the earth, viewed the feminine as the generative soil of reality ontologically prior, the literal source of all things.
Yes.
Then we mapped the great inversion. We explored how shifting geopolitical landscapes and the need for portable law led later theological systems to establish a top-down masculine architect.
A structural reinterpretation that preserved the ancient load-bearing walls but completely reversed the hierarchy, turning the originating source into merely the vessel.
Right. And we explored how that ancient flip isn't just history, it dictates modern psychology. It is the secret reason why we so often value abstract rules, spreadsheets, and rigid control over the messy, embodied relational life right in front of us. We are constantly trying to build the fence without tending the soil.
But by understanding that layered history, you can step out of the reactivity, stop fighting ghosts of ancient empires, and choose your own ontological model with intention.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Take a real, honest look at your own life right now. Your career, your family, your personal goals. Are you operating form first? Are you constantly trying to force top-down structure, rigid schedules, and abstract expectations on your life, and then getting exhausted and frustrated when the messy reality of your day doesn't comply?
A lot of people are.
Or are you operating field first, focusing on cultivating the generative soil, your physical health, your mental bandwidth, your daily environment, and trusting that the right sustainable structures will organically emerge from that rich foundation? Knowing which layer of reality you prioritize might just change the way you build your world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of the ideas around you.